You know what humiliation feels like when it's served with white tablecloths and a fake smile. Patricia Wilson looked me up and down like my jacket was something she'd scrape off her heel. Her husband barely nodded, already deciding how much I was worth based on what I wore, not who I was. My son sat beside me, jaw tight, trying to keep the peace. His fiancée didn't even look up from her phone, and I let them because I didn't come to that Manhattan steakhouse to impress anyone. I came to measure character. I'd spent decades building quiet leverage insurance, contracts, relationships that don't show up on Instagram. And that night, I dressed like a man who couldn't afford the breadbasket on purpose. They thought they were watching a poor, harmless father get humbled. But the moment a certain person recognized my name, the whole room shifted. Their confidence didn't fade. It collapsed. And that's when I realized I wasn't just protecting my son from a bad marriage. I was about to dismantle everything they'd built without raising my voice once. Some of you know that weight the moment you realize your child is about to marry into the wrong family. My name is Michael Thompson. I'm 62. And 20 minutes before that dinner, I still believed I was just a retired man meeting my future in-laws. A little nervous, a little hopeful. The normal stuff. Then Patricia Wilson hit me with that smile that isn't a smile. "You don't eat at places like this very often, do you?" she said, loud enough for the hostess to hear. I gave her a polite nod. "Not as often as my son does," I said. David shifted beside me, smoothing his tie like he was preparing for trial. He'd worn the Navy suit we bought together years ago, his first big job suit. He looked sharp, earned. His fiancée, Brittany, looked like she belonged on a billboard. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect indifference. She kept scrolling, thumb moving like a metronome, eyes never landing on me for more than a half second. I had chosen my outfit carefully. Simple jacket, no watch, no cufflinks. The version of myself people dismiss, because I needed to see who they were when they thought nobody important was watching. And already I had my answer. That familiar silence? It's the kind that tells you the real conversation is happening without words. The hostess led us toward the dining room, her gaze flicking to my sleeves, then to David's suit, then to Brittany's designer bag. She smiled brightest at the bag. David whispered, "They should be here any minute. Her dad likes to make an entrance." Brittany finally glanced up and sighed like my existence was a scheduling problem. "David, your father's jacket looks inexpensive." I kept my face neutral. Years in business taught me you don't flinch in front of sharks. David's ears turned red. "Brittany, that's not appropriate." For a split second I felt proud, not because he defended me, because he defended himself. A man who won't speak up at dinner won't speak up in a marriage. A sleek, black car rolled up outside. Out stepped Robert and Patricia Wilson, perfectly styled, perfectly late, perfectly sure the world would bend. Patricia's eyes swept over David with approval, lingered on her daughter with satisfaction, and then landed on me like she'd found a stain. Robert shook David's hand like he was closing a deal. Then Patricia said, "And you must be David's father." The way she said father sounded like problem. I smiled. "Michael Thompson, nice to meet you." Her eyes narrowed. "And what do you do, Michael?" I could have ended this in 10 seconds. Instead, I chose the slow way. "I'm a teacher," I said, "and I watch their respect die in real time. Some of you recognize that look when people hear your title and decide your value." "A teacher," Patricia repeated, like she was tasting something bitter. I nodded. "Spanish. Mostly online now." Robert's posture shifted. Not dramatic, just enough. Like he'd stopped investing in the conversation. "How modern," Patricia said, as if I'd confessed to breeding exotic bugs. David's shoulders tightened. He could feel it too. That quiet recalculation. Your son is impressive, but his family? We followed them into the restaurant. It was all marble and soft lighting and expensive voices, the kind of place where people don't raise their tone because they don't have to. Robert announced, "Table for 5, under Wilson." The hostess practically glowed. "Of course, Mr. Wilson. Right this way." As we walked, I heard Patricia murmur to Robert, "I told you we should have picked somewhere more accessible." Accessible, meaning safe for the poor. I kept my hands relaxed at my sides. I'd sat across from bigger men than Robert Wilson, men who didn't need to brag. Brittany kept taking photos, chandeliers, glasses, herself. She posed like the evening was already a post. David leaned toward me. "Dad, I'm sorry if this feels. I cut him off gently. We're fine. But inside, I was already making notes. Because when someone shows you how they treat lesser people, they're showing you who they really are. And my son deserved to see it too. The first insult always comes dressed as curiosity. We sat. Prime location. Perfect for being seen. Patricia loved that. Isn't this lovely? She said, eyes scanning the room like she owned the air. Michael, have you ever been somewhere quite this elegant before? I gave her an appreciative look. It's beautiful, I said honestly. Very impressive. Her smile sharpened. We've been members for years. The wine list alone is worth it. The waiter appeared. Crisp suit. Professional face. His eyes landed on Robert like a compass finding north. Champagne? He offered. We have a vintage Dom. Bring the bottle, Robert said immediately. David shifted. Mr. Wilson, that's really not... Robert waved him off. Future family. We celebrate. The champagne arrived with a speech about pedigree. Patricia raised her glass. To new experiences. Her eyes met mine. For everyone. I sipped, small and controlled. Then Patricia leaned in. So tell me, teaching. That must be fulfilling. The pay is adequate? There it was, the real topic. David's cheeks flushed. He opened his mouth, then closed it, trapped between loyalty and embarrassment. I saved him. I make enough to live comfortably, I said. Patricia's eyes flickered. Comfortably? In what universe? And I felt it, the little hook setting deeper. Because now they weren't just judging me. They were trying to place me on a scale. Some of you know the moment a conversation turns into an audit. Where do you live? Patricia asked, sweet as syrup. Sarasota, I said. Near the beach. How charming, she replied, as if charming meant small. Robert chewed slowly, watching me like a banker watching a loan application. Renting, I assume? I smiled. No. I own it. Patricia blinked. A flicker of surprise. Quickly buried under skepticism. A little beach cottage. How delightful. Brittany finally looked up from her phone. David said you sold your house after your wife passed. Was the mortgage too much on a teacher's pension? The innocence was practiced. Weaponized. David's fork stopped midair. His eyes flashed. Brittany, I lifted a hand. Not to silence him. To steady him. I sold because it was too big, I said. Too many memories. Patricia nodded with fake sympathy. Older homes can be such money pits. Maintenance must have been overwhelming. David's jaw tightened so hard I worried about his teeth. And that's when I realized this wasn't just rudeness. This was strategy. They were establishing dominance, making sure I understood my place. I took another sip of champagne and let the silence stretch. Because the slower you let people reveal themselves, the cleaner the truth becomes. When people can't find your wealth, they start digging for your past. Your wife? Patricia said softly. What did she do? I kept my voice calm. She was in insurance. Robert nodded like he'd solved a riddle. Claims processing. Sales. I could have corrected him. Instead, I gave him a small, harmless smile. She had her own company. You made... Patricia's eyes sharpened. A small local agency? Something like that, I said. Brittany smiled brightly. Well, the important thing is, David is successful now. She stopped herself mid-sentence. Too late. David's voice was quiet. Successful? Compared to what? Patricia jumped in quickly. She means you're nothing like people who coast on family money. It's a compliment. David stared at Brittany. The air got tighter. Then the waiter returned to take orders. Robert and Patricia ordered like they were auditioning for a lifestyle magazine. Wagyu, lobster, the most expensive sides. Extra truffle? I ordered the sea bass. Simple. My son kept glancing at me like he was trying to read a contract written in invisible ink. And I let him, because the next part wasn't about humiliating them. It was about letting David see the kind of marriage he was walking into. And once a man sees that clearly, he doesn't unsee it. Some of you recognize that feeling watching someone you love slowly wake up. Appetizers arrived with theater. Oysters for the table, Patricia announced, loud enough for nearby diners. Michael probably hasn't had many opportunities to try them. I smiled politely and took one. I'd eaten oysters on coasts Patricia couldn't pronounce. But letting her feel superior cost me nothing. Robert leaned back. David tells us you've been supportive of his career. I'm proud of him, I said. As you should be, Patricia added. It must be a relief knowing he can take care of himself financially. That word financially landed heavy. Brittany chimed in with false brightness. No more worrying about retirement planning or helping with bills. David's face went still, not angry, focused. That's a familiar silence. The silence before a man stops making excuses. I watched him carefully, because David grew up believing love meant patience, and patience meant enduring discomfort. But there's a difference between enduring hardship together and enduring disrespect alone. Patricia leaned forward again. We should talk about the wedding. David nearly choked. We haven't even talked about engagement. Brittany laughed. You've been carrying the ring box for weeks. David went pale. His surprise had been stolen. Patricia turned to me. I assume you'll want to contribute something, even if it's symbolic. Symbolic. Like my presence. I nodded slowly. What kind of budget are we talking about? They exchanged glances, and I realized they thought they had me cornered. A number can reveal more about a person than a confession, Brittany said carefully. Around $200,000. Nothing too extravagant. David's fork clattered. 200,000? He repeated. Patricia sighed like he was being unreasonable. We've been planning Brittany's wedding since she was 12. Robert patted the table like a benevolent king. We'll handle the bulk. We wouldn't expect your father to cover more than 10 to 15%. 10 to 15%. They wanted $20,000 to $30,000 from the teacher. My son stared at them like he was watching a magic trick go wrong. Patricia smiled at me. Family supports family, don't you think? I held her gaze. And right then, across the restaurant, something shifted. A man in a chef's coat began walking toward us, his face brightening with recognition. He wasn't headed to Robert Wilson. He was headed to me. I felt David notice too. His eyes followed the chef, confusion turning to curiosity. Patricia kept talking, unaware the room was about to pivot. But the chef's smile widened, and I knew the evening had reached the edge of its first cliff. Because when the wrong people assume you're powerless, the right people only have to say your name once. Some of you know that sudden quiet when a lie meets the real world. Mr. Thompson, the chef said loudly, stopping at our table. Patricia froze mid-sip. Robert blinked like his vision had gone blurry. Brittany's phone lowered slowly, like even she sensed something was off. I stood. Chef Morrison, it's good to see you. He grabbed my hand with both of his, genuine warmth in his eyes. I can't believe it's you. A server behind him carried a bottle of champagne I recognized instantly. This is from our private reserve, Chef Morrison said. With our compliments. Patricia's mouth opened slightly. Robert's voice came out thin. Private reserve? Chef Morrison turned to the table, smiling like he was proud to say it. Ladies and gentlemen, you're dining with the man who saved this restaurant. The words hit like a bell. David stared at me. Dad. What? Chef Morrison nodded. 2 years ago, we had a kitchen fire. Insurance wanted to total us out. We were staring at bankruptcy. He looked at me like I'd been a lifeline. Your wife's company, Thompson Insurance, stepped in. They didn't just pay the claim. They rebuilt us. They treated us like family. Patricia's jewelry trembled against her glass. Robert's confidence cracked right down the middle, and Brittany's expression finally wasn't boredom. It was calculation. I sat back down and sipped champagne that cost more than their entire performance. And for the first time all night, I watched them become afraid to speak. Respect that arrives after a price tag isn't respect. It's appetite. Robert cleared his throat. Thompson Insurance was yours? I nodded. My wife built it. I helped run the numbers. David looked like his entire childhood had been relabeled. Dad, you never told me. You never asked, I said gently. And you were proud of doing it on your own. Patricia leaned forward, voice suddenly honey. How? Large was the company? Commercial real estate, I said. New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. Robert's eyes darted doing math he'd never had to do in public before. The sale, he said carefully. That must have been substantial. It was adequate, I replied, using his word. Brittany's face changed like a filter flipping on. Her posture softened. Her smile warmed. My goodness, she said, suddenly attentive. I would love to spend more time getting to know you, Mr. Thompson. An hour ago, she couldn't look at me. Now she was acting like I was family heirloom china. David watched it happen, and I saw the shift in him. Not anger, not heartbreak yet. Just clarity. Patricia laughed lightly. Michael, you're so modest. I smiled. Money doesn't have to be loud. Robert nodded eagerly. Wise. Very wise. Then Brittany said it, agreed, wearing a diamond smile. Maybe $200,000 is too modest for a wedding. David set his fork down slowly. I think, he said, voice calm, we should call it a night. And the way Brittany's face fell told me exactly what she'd been in love with. Not my son. The upgrade. Some of you know that heartbreak comes quieter than you expect. Outside the restaurant, the air felt colder, even with Manhattan lights buzzing around us. Robert insisted on paying the bill. Pride demanded it. But his hand trembled slightly when he signed. The valet pulled my car up first. I didn't do it to show off. I drive what's safe and comfortable. But when I handed the valet the keys, I felt 4 pairs of eyes burn into the vehicle like it was a confession. Robert managed. Nice car. It's comfortable, I said, and nothing more. In the rearview mirror, I watched them huddle under the awning, an emergency meeting dressed as family concern. David stared out his window, silent. I didn't push him. I didn't fill the space with advice, because some realizations need silence to land. Back at the hotel, my phone rang before I took my shoes off. Dad, David said, voice strained. I'm sorry. For what, son? For not defending you enough. For letting them talk to you like that. I sat in the chair by the window, looking out at the city. You don't owe me an apology. You needed to see them. His laugh was bitter. Did you see Brittany recalculating the wedding budget in real time? I saw it. He inhaled sharply. I was going to propose tonight. Silence. Then, softer. I think I almost made the biggest mistake of my life. I didn't say I told you so. I said, you're not the first good man to confuse attention for love. Some of you know that weight. And if you do, tell me, where are you listening from? The next morning, the calls started like clockwork. Brittany. Again. And again. Then Patricia, leaving voicemails dipped in sugar. Then Robert, sounding like a man practicing charm in a mirror. David called later. Dad, they're not taking this well. That's their problem. He hesitated. Robert made threats. About my job, about connections. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Threatening me was one thing. Threatening my son's future was a different category of mistake. That afternoon there was a knock at my Florida door. A delivery guy held a bouquet of white roses big enough to block his face. The card read, Let's bloom into the friendship we're meant to have. I laughed once, quietly. Because some of you know that kind of manipulation, the sudden sweetness after cruelty. Then my phone rang. Robert Wilson. Michael, he said, forced joviality. We got off on the wrong foot. Family is an investment, you understand. There it was. Investment. He wasn't calling to apologize. He was calling to negotiate. He pitched it like a business deal. Brittany would grow, learn, change, if I just invested in her development. I asked, what would this guidance cost? He chuckled. Family doesn't cost anything. But his pause betrayed him. Because he didn't mean family. He meant my money. I told him I'd think about it. Then I called David back. They're trying to buy you back, I said. He exhaled. You're going to mess with them, aren't you? I looked out at the Gulf. Calm water. Bright sun. I'm going to teach them the difference between influence and power. Some of you know that moment you stop being nice and start being precise. Patricia showed up at my place 2 hours later, unannounced, perfectly styled, smiling like a blade. She walked in and immediately started cataloging. Furniture, view, small details that scream value even when you live simply. Charming, she said, the way rich people say small. We sat. Coffee. Polite words with sharp edges underneath. She apologized without apologizing, blamed nerves, claimed misunderstanding, then slid into her real pitch. Michael, she said, leaning forward, you and I understand how the world works. I waited. She proposed a full life education makeover for her adult daughter, travel, charity, cultural experiences like Brittany was a rescue dog that needed training. How long? I asked. 18 months, maybe 2 years. She said it like David should wait on the shelf while I funded Brittany's transformation tour. Then she named the number. 300,000, maybe 4, to do it properly. $400,000 to teach someone empathy. I asked the only question that mattered. Do you actually believe Brittany loves my son? For a split second, Patricia's mask slipped. Love takes many forms, she said carefully. She appreciates his stability. Stability. Not kindness, not character. Stability. Then Patricia's tone changed. The sweetness vanished. She leaned in and said Robert had connections, and David's career could get complicated. The air in my living room went cold. She gave me 48 hours to force my son back into that relationship. And when she left, I sat alone in silence, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not helplessness, a focused, controlled anger. Because that wasn't a threat. That was a declaration of war. That familiar silence after someone crosses a line, it's not emptiness. It's planning. I didn't call David and dump panic on his shoulders. He's a good man. He'd try to fight with his bare hands. Instead, I made one phone call I hadn't made in 3 years. "Marcus Chen," I said when he picked up. He laughed. "Michael Thompson. Retirement bored you already?" "I need a favor," I replied. "Someone threatened my son." Marcus stopped laughing. He asked one question. "How thoroughly do you want them educated?" "I don't want them destroyed," I said. "I want them to understand the difference between influence and power." By Thursday, Marcus had a full profile of Wilson Financial on my kitchen table. It was worse than I expected. Debt stacked on debt. One major client holding the whole thing up. A father-in-law's construction contracts keeping the lights on. Rumors of creative billing. A house of cards dressed in designer clothing. Now their desperation made sense. They weren't just greedy. They were cornered. And cornered people do reckless things. My phone rang. "Robert Wilson." "Michael," he said, voice too smooth. "Have you thought about our proposal?" I smiled. "Yes," I said. "And I'm prepared to fund the entire program." Silence. Then a breath, shaky. "The entire program?" 400,000, I confirmed. "To help Brittany become the woman David deserves." He was practically trembling through the phone. Then I delivered the hook inside the hook. "Of course, I'll need due diligence. Financial statements, tax returns, credit reports, standard procedure." He tried to protest. "This is family," I said. $400,000 is always business. And I heard it, the sound of a man realizing he'd just invited a professional into his lies. "Some of you know that sweetest trap is the one your opponent thanks you for." I invited them to Sarasota. "Bring Brittany," I said. "Bring your financial advisor, too. I'd love to understand your strategy." Robert agreed quickly, too quickly, then hung up like he needed oxygen. 10 minutes later, David called. "Dad, Brittany is crying. Her parents are freaking out about some audit." "No audit," I said. "Just homework." He groaned. "Please tell me you didn't actually agree to give them money." "I did," I said. He went silent. "Then, why?" "Because in chess, you don't win by shouting," I told him. "You win by letting your opponent move into the exact square you want." I explained what Marcus found, how Wilson Financial was wobbling, how their image was covering panic. David exhaled, slow. "So they wanted your money to patch their holes?" "Exactly." "And you're going to—" "I'm going to do nothing illegal," I said. "Nothing violent. Nothing messy." Then I added the line he'd remember for the rest of his life. "I'm going to use the truth the way they use threats." He whispered, "Dad, be careful." I looked at the Gulf. Calm water. Bright day. "I am careful," I said. "That's why I'm dangerous." Saturday morning, they arrived looking like they hadn't slept. Robert stepped out first, less swagger, more sweat. Patricia's smile looked glued on. Brittany stared at the ground like she hated every second of it. I welcomed them like guests. Coffee, pastries, sunlight, and on the coffee table, manila folders. Powdered sugar and paperwork, the most Florida version of quiet justice. Robert's eyes locked onto the folders and didn't move. Patricia tried to keep her voice light. "Michael, this is so kind of you." "Of course," I said, sitting down. "Let's talk about Brittany's education program." Robert cleared his throat. "We've been reconsidering the scope. Something more modest might be." "Nonsense," I said gently. 400,000 is the right amount. Then I opened a folder like I was reading a menu. "Although," I added, "I'm surprised you need my help at all." Silence. I continued conversationally. "According to these reports, Wilson Financial shows assets over 12 million. Impressive." Robert swallowed hard. "Those reports are confidential." "Were?" I corrected. Patricia's fingers trembled. "What is this?" I looked at Brittany. "Your mother visited my home and threatened my son's career." Brittany's head snapped toward Patricia. "Mom, what?" Patricia's mouth opened. No sound. I said calmly. "She said if David didn't reconcile, Robert would make phone calls." Brittany turned to her father, horrified. "Dad?" Robert went pale. And right there, under Florida sunlight, every lie started to rot. Some of you recognize that moment when a family's mask falls off all at once. I laid it out cleanly. Robert, I said, your board position is advisory. It gives you a title, not power. He tried to speak. Nothing came. I flipped to the next page. Your debt-to-asset ratio is catastrophic. You're behind on rent. Your largest client is considering leaving. Patricia whispered, how do you know this? Because when someone threatens my child, I said softly, I become extremely thorough. Brittany looked like she'd been dropped into someone else's life. This isn't true, she muttered, but her voice lacked belief. I didn't raise mine. I could make a few calls, I said, and share concerns about Wilson financial stability. In my world, rumors don't start randomly. They start because someone earned them. Robert's eyes widened with panic. Then I offered the other path. Or, I said, you can leave my son alone. No more calls. No more threats. No more connections. Patricia's voice cracked. And if we do? I smiled, not cruelly, clinically. Then nothing happens, I said. That's the gift I'm offering you. Robert's shoulders sagged. His pride finally lost to survival. Brittany stared at her parents like she was seeing them for the first time, and I realized something sad. She wasn't the mastermind. She was the product. The hardest part of quiet justice is leaving room for people to change without letting them harm you again. I stood and walked to the window, looking at the water. Brittany, I said, you're young. You can still choose what kind of person you're going to be. She scoffed weakly. This isn't about money. I turned back. Then why did you only respect my son after you heard my name? She didn't answer. Robert tried a different angle, soft voice, wounded pride. Michael, how did you know we couldn't actually hurt David's career? I said, because I built my life on evaluating risk. Then I delivered the line that ended the meeting. You had influence on paper. I have influence in people's phones. Patricia's face tightened. She understood. I walked to the door and opened it for them. Go back to New York, I said, and let David live. Robert nodded. Quick. Patricia didn't speak. Brittany paused at the threshold, eyes searching mine. For sympathy. For forgiveness. For a shortcut. I gave her the only thing worth giving. A truth. Find someone who wants you for who you are, I said. Not what you can extract. She swallowed, then followed her parents out. When the door closed, the apartment felt lighter, and my phone rang. David. Dad? He said. Are they gone? Yes, I replied. It's over. He exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. What did you do? I reminded them, I said, that bullies hate facts more than they hate strength. Some of you know that relief can feel like grief's quieter cousin. David was silent for a long moment. Then he said, Dad, you're kind of terrifying. I chuckled softly. I prefer prepared. He asked, why didn't you ever tell me about the money? About Mom's company? I leaned back, staring at the ceiling like I could see the past. Because you built your life with your own hands, I said, and I didn't want my wealth to become your identity. He whispered, I almost proposed, because I thought I should feel lucky someone like her wanted me. That sentence hit harder than any threat. Some of you know that weight, the one that sits on men who were taught to measure their worth by what they provide. David, I said, you never needed to buy love. He laughed bitterly. Apparently they thought you could. I didn't say your name. I didn't attack. I just asked, what do you want now? He breathed out slowly. Time. Space. Someone who doesn't treat my family like a liability. I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. That's the right answer. And then, because the story isn't just mine, I said this gently. If you're listening right now, tell us, where are you watching from? I'm always curious how far these stories travel. And if this hits something familiar, share it with someone who needs the reminder. David chuckled. Dad, you're turning trauma into community. Maybe, I said. Maybe that's the only way to make it worth something. The funny thing about power is this. The quietest people often have the deepest roots. A week later, I got one last message from Patricia. It was polished, diplomatic, the kind of text that pretends the last week never happened. Let's put this behind us. Families shouldn't fight. I stared at it for a moment. Then I deleted it. Not out of spite, out of clarity. Because reconciliation without accountability is just another form of control. David moved on, slowly, not dramatically. The way real healing happens, one honest day at a time. And me? I went back to my simple, practical life. Coffee on the balcony, sun on the water, a quiet mind. But I carried one lesson like a pocket knife you don't show unless you must. When people treat you like dirt because they think you're poor, they aren't just rude. They're revealing how they'll treat your child when your child is vulnerable. That night in Manhattan, I didn't take everything they built with violence or revenge fantasies. I took it with something sharper: information, timing, and the refusal to be intimidated. And if you've ever sat in that familiar silence watching someone you love ignore red flags because they want the dream so badly, then you know how heavy it gets. You don't have to carry it alone. If this story held you, even a little, share it with someone you care about. And if you want more quiet justice stories like this, you can support the channel by subscribing softly, the way good decisions are made. Because the best victories don't end with applause. They end with peace. And that, in the end, is the only thing worth building. You know what humiliation feels like when it's served with white tablecloths and a fake smile.